They say revenge is a dish best served cold. At 72, I had plenty of time to let mine chill to absolute perfection. By the time I was finished, my daughter Melissa's sophisticated wedding looked like a tragic joke compared to what I built from the ashes of her betrayal. The same society vultures who deemed me too embarrassing for her precious day ended up crawling on their hands and knees, begging for invitations to mine, and that $200,000 she expected me to quietly hand over for her fairy tale. Well, let's just say I found a far more satisfying use for every last penny, one that haunted her dreams and made her question everything she thought she knew about power, class, and worth. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and you deserve to understand how a devoted mother became the architect of her own daughter's deepest regret. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this, and if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps give me the strength to speak my truth. Now, let's get into my story. My name is Evelyn Parker, and this is the story of how my daughter's cruelest betrayal became the foundation for my greatest triumph, and how sometimes the people who underestimate you give you the most powerful gift of all, motivation. Let me take you back to that soul-crushing September morning when I discovered my only child, the girl I'd sacrificed everything for, was getting married in 3 weeks, and I found out the same way any random stranger would, through someone else's social media photos. Picture this. I'm having my usual morning coffee with Mrs. Chen, my sweet neighbor, when she innocently pulls out her phone to show me pictures from her downtown walk. "Oh, Evelyn," she says with genuine excitement, "such a beautiful bride. Your daughter looked absolutely radiant in her dress fitting." Time stopped. My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips as my eyes focused on the screen, and what I saw there ripped through my chest like a dagger. There was Melissa, my baby girl, glowing in an exquisite white gown, laughing with a group of bridesmaids I'd never seen before in my life, standing outside Morrison Manor, the most exclusive, expensive wedding venue in our entire city. No engagement announcement had reached my ears, no save-the-date card had graced my mailbox, no excited phone call about dress shopping or venue hunting, nothing. Radio silence. This was the child I'd raised single-handedly after her father's sudden death when she was just 12 years old. This was the girl I'd worked myself to the bone for, pulling double shifts as a high school mathematics teacher, tutoring students until my eyes burned and my back ached, selling my own mother's precious jewelry to scrape together her college tuition. I'd given her every opportunity I'd never had, every advantage my sacrifices could buy. And she'd planned her entire wedding, the most important day of her life, as if I didn't exist. My hands shook as I excused myself and stumbled home, my heart pounding with a mixture of disbelief, rage, and devastating heartbreak. I had to call her. I had to hear her explain this impossibly cruel oversight. The phone rang 5 agonizing times before she answered, her voice distracted and dismissive. "Mom, I'm really busy right now." "Melissa." I fought to keep my voice steady, professional, controlled, even as my world crumbled around me. "Mrs. Chen just showed me photos of you in a wedding dress. Are you getting married?" The silence that followed was deafening, stretching so long I wondered if the call had dropped or if my daughter had simply stopped breathing. "Melissa, are you there?" Yes. Her voice was barely a whisper, heavy with guilt she couldn't hide. "Next month. And you weren't planning to tell your own mother? The woman who raised you, who sacrificed everything for you?" Another endless pause. Then, in a tone so cold and calculated, it felt like ice water in my veins. "Mom, David's family has very specific expectations for this wedding. It's going to be extremely upscale, incredibly sophisticated. The guest list has to be curated. I just don't think you'd be comfortable in that environment." Those words, "I don't think you'd be comfortable," hit me like a physical assault, but I pressed on, needing to hear her say it plainly. "What exactly are you telling me, Melissa? Look, you know how you get at formal social events. You get nervous. You say things that don't quite fit. David's colleagues will be there. Fortune 500 executives, politicians, people whose opinions matter for his career. His mother specifically told us we need to be extremely strategic about the guest list. I can't risk any complications? Complications! 4 decades of sleepless nights, worried sick about her future. Complications. Skipping meals so she could have the best clothes, the best opportunities. Complications. Attending every school play, every graduation, every achievement, bursting with pride at the remarkable woman she'd become. Complications. So you're not inviting me, your mother, to your wedding. Mom, please don't make this more difficult than it already is. Maybe we can arrange a small dinner afterward, just immediate family. I am your immediate family, Melissa. I'm your only family. You know what I mean? And in that moment, with those 4 devastating words, I knew exactly what she meant. My daughter hadn't just excluded me from her wedding day, she'd written me out of her new life entirely. She'd chosen the approval of strangers, cold, calculating social climbers, over the unconditional love of the woman who'd given her everything. She'd looked at my lifetime of sacrifice and decided it was an embarrassment. She'd calculated my worth against their wealth and found me lacking. She'd bet everything on impressing people who would discard her the moment she stopped being useful to them. But here's what my brilliant, successful, sophisticated daughter didn't realize in her desperate rush to climb the social ladder. She just made the most catastrophic mistake of her privileged life, and I, this embarrassing, unsophisticated, nervous old woman, was about to teach her a lesson about power, respect, and consequence that would echo through every corner of her carefully constructed world. The game had just begun, and she had no idea who she was really playing against. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen for 3 hours, staring at the wall where Melissa's graduation photos hung, every achievement made possible by my sacrifices, and now I was too embarrassing to acknowledge. But as the initial shock faded, anger began to simmer, not the explosive kind, but the cold, calculating anger of a woman who'd been pushed too far. I called my sister Janet in Chicago. She said what? Janet's voice could have shattered glass. After I repeated the conversation, Janet was quiet for a moment. Then, Evelyn, honey, you are a retired mathematics department head who taught calculus to kids who went on to become engineers, doctors, and yes, investment bankers. You have 2 master's degrees and spent 42 years shaping young minds. You are not an embarrassment to anyone. Maybe she's right. Maybe I don't fit in with David's crowd. Stop that right now. This is about a young woman who's forgotten where she came from and a man who's probably poisoned her against her own mother. This isn't about you not being good enough. This is about them not being good enough to deserve you. After we hung up, I walked to my home office and pulled out a file I'd been avoiding for months. Inside were letters from former students, newspaper clippings about my teaching awards, and documentation of something I'd been considering but hadn't had the courage to pursue. 3 years ago, I'd inherited my aunt's property, a beautiful Victorian house on 5 acres just outside town. I'd been thinking about converting it into an educational facility. I'd even had preliminary conversations with architects and gotten zoning approval, but I'd hesitated, thinking I was too old to start something new. Looking at those papers now, I realized I'd been thinking too small. If my daughter wanted sophistication, if she wanted something impressive enough for David's business connections, then I'd show her what real class looked like. I was going to build something that would make her wedding look like a backyard barbecue. The next morning, I drove to Aunt Margaret's property. The Victorian house sat on a hill overlooking the valley, with gardens that had once been the envy of the county. It needed work, but the bones were solid, and the potential was breathtaking. Within 2 hours, I was walking through the property with Sarah Hamilton from Hamilton Architecture, her enthusiasm infectious as she pointed out possibilities I hadn't even considered. "This could be extraordinary," she said, standing in what had been Aunt Margaret's ballroom. "We could restore the original features while adding modern amenities, perfect for events and educational programming. How long would a full renovation take? With the right team and budget, 6 months for the main house. What could we accomplish in 8 weeks?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "That's ambitious, but if we focused on the ballroom, the main entrance, and basic landscaping, we could create something stunning for a launch event." Perfect! Melissa's wedding was in 3 weeks. My event would be 1 week later. I spent the rest of the day making calls. By evening, I had commitments from 12 different professionals, all excited about the challenge. But I needed something more than just a beautiful venue. I needed a mission that would elevate this project beyond simple revenge. That's when I remembered the letters, hundreds of them from former students over the years. Thank you notes from kids who'd struggled with algebra and gone on to become engineers. Updates from students who'd found their confidence in my calculus class. Reading through them that night, a pattern emerged. So many mentioned how I'd believed in them when others didn't, how I'd created a safe space where they could learn and grow without fear of judgment. The idea crystallized around midnight. This wouldn't just be an event venue, it would be the Margaret Parker Center for Educational Excellence, a place where young people could come for tutoring, test preparation, college counseling, and life skills training. The event side would fund the educational mission. By dawn, I had a business plan sketched out and a list of 20 former students I wanted to recruit as volunteer mentors. My first stop was the office of Patricia Williams, the best nonprofit attorney in the state and a former student from my class of 1995. Mrs. Parker! Patricia stood up from behind her desk, genuine pleasure lighting her face. What brings you here? I need to establish a nonprofit organization, and I need it done quickly. How quickly? I want to host a launch event in 8 weeks. After I explained my vision, Patricia's expression shifted from professional interest to genuine excitement. Mrs. Parker, this is exactly what our community needs. Consider me your first volunteer board member, and my legal fees are waived. By noon, I had nonprofit paperwork in motion and a board forming. Patricia had reached out to 3 other former students: Marcus Chen, now a successful architect, Dr. Angela Rodriguez, a child psychologist, and James Thompson, a marketing director. Word traveled fast. By the end of the week, I was fielding calls from people I hadn't heard from in years. Mrs. Parker, this is Tom Bradley from your 1987 calculus class. I heard about your project. I'm a general contractor now, and I'd like to donate materials and labor. Tom, that's incredibly generous, but I can pay. Mrs. Parker, you stayed after school with me every day for 2 months when I was failing. This is my chance to give back. And the same conversation repeated itself dozens of times. Former students offering services, materials, volunteer hours, community members who'd heard about the project and believed in the mission. Maria Santos, who'd graduated in 2010 and now owned a catering company, offered to handle the launch event at cost. David Kim, class of 2003, arrived one morning with a landscape crew and started transforming the grounds without being asked. The local newspaper heard about the project and ran a front-page article titled, "Beloved Teacher Creates Center for Educational Excellence." 3 days later, I received a call from the state superintendent of schools wanting to discuss potential partnerships. But the most satisfying moment came in a text from Jennifer Walsh, class of 2005. Mrs. Parker, I'm the social media manager for Morrison Events. I'd love to help promote your launch event. Some of these society types need to see what real class looks like. Morrison Events, the same company handling Melissa's wedding. 3 weeks into renovation, the center was transformed. The ballroom gleamed with restored hardwood floors and crystal chandeliers. Fresh paint in warm colors made every room feel alive with possibility. But more than the physical transformation, it was the energy that amazed me. Every day brought new volunteers, new offers of help, new expressions of support. Dr. Angela Rodriguez had developed a comprehensive tutoring program with 30 volunteer mentors ready to begin working with students. The launch event was generating buzz throughout the region. Then, Caroline Morrison from Morrison Events called. "Mrs. Parker, I've been following coverage of your center, and I'm incredibly impressed. I'd like to offer my services for your launch event." "That's very kind, but I'm already working with Maria Santos Catering." "I'm talking about partnering, what you're building, the way you're bringing the community together. That's the kind of event I want my name associated with." "And your current clients? Won't they mind you working with someone like me?" A pause. "Mrs. Parker, my current clients would be lucky to have half your grace and dignity." Caroline's involvement changed everything. Within days, RSVPs began pouring in from the mayor, chamber of commerce president, and executives from the largest companies in the region. But Caroline brought more than connections. She brought insight. "Evelyn," she said over coffee, "I need to tell you something about the Whitman family. They're clients of mine, and while I maintain confidentiality, I can tell you this. Their idea of sophistication is purely superficial. They judge people by bank accounts and zip codes. They wouldn't recognize genuine accomplishment if it introduced itself." That evening, Melissa called. "Mom, I heard about your project. David's mother thinks you're trying to upstage us. She says the timing is deliberately planned to steal attention from our wedding." "Melissa, are you calling to ask me to postpone the launch of an educational center because it might upstage your wedding?" "I'm calling to ask if we can find a way for both events to happen without this tension." "There's no tension from my end. I'm building something meaningful with my life. You're getting married. Both are worth celebrating." "But the guest list, Mom. People are going to compare." "Let them compare. I'm proud of what I'm building here." A long pause. "Mom, I want you to know that I miss you." My heart clenched, but I kept my voice steady. "I miss you too, sweetheart. Maybe after the wedding, we could have lunch. You could show me the center. I'd like that." Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear. I woke at 5 a.m. from excitement, not anxiety. Today wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about celebrating something beautiful. By 6 a.m., volunteers were arriving. Maria Santos and her team were setting up in the kitchen. Caroline Morrison was coordinating with vendors. Jennifer Walsh was documenting everything. At 7 a.m., Patricia Williams arrived with a surprise. The State Education Department wants to partner with us. They're prepared to provide a matching grant of $200,000. As I was getting dressed, I received a text from Melissa. "Mom, I wanted you to know that David and I are thinking of you today. I hope your event is everything you dreamed it would be." I texted back, "Thank you, sweetheart. I love you." At 9 a.m., I arrived to find the parking area filling up. The transformed Victorian house stood proudly on its hill, ready to serve its new purpose. Caroline met me at the entrance. "Evelyn, you need to see something." In the ballroom, dozens of my former students, spanning 4 decades, were making final preparations. Some had driven hours to be here. Others had flown in from out of state. "Surprise!" said Dr. Angela Rodriguez. Standing with her were Marcus Chen, James Thompson, Patricia Williams, and at least 20 other former students I hadn't seen in years. Tom Bradley stepped forward with a beautifully crafted wooden plaque, the Margaret Parker Center for Educational Excellence, founded by Evelyn Parker. A woman who taught us that excellence isn't about being perfect. It's about never giving up on yourself or others. Dedicated by her grateful students, 2024. Below the inscription were hundreds of signatures, every student I'd ever taught who could be reached. I couldn't speak through my tears. By noon, guests were arriving for the official launch. Unlike typical society events where people clustered in exclusive groups, this gathering was inclusive and warm. Former students were introducing themselves to community leaders. Parents were sharing stories with teachers. Business executives were asking genuine questions about the center's mission. At 1 p.m., I gave my remarks in the ballroom, standing before a digital wall displaying photos and quotes from former students, friends, colleagues, and especially my former students. I began, 47 years ago, I walked into my first classroom with a simple belief that every young person deserves someone who believes in their potential. Today, we're launching the Margaret Parker Center not just as a beautiful venue, but as a commitment to that belief. This center will provide tutoring, mentoring, test preparation, and college counseling to students who might otherwise slip through the cracks. But I want to be clear about something. This center exists because of community, because of former students who remembered a teacher who believed in them and wanted to pay it forward. What we're celebrating today isn't my accomplishment, it's ours. The applause was thunderous. After my remarks, Patricia announced the state partnership. James Thompson revealed that 3 other communities had already committed to replicating the model. But the most powerful moment came when Marcus Chen stepped to the microphone. "Mrs. Parker, when I was 16, I was failing your geometry class because I was working 20 hours a week to help support my family. Instead of letting me fail, you arranged for me to get paid tutoring other students. You turned my struggle into a strength. That's what you've done again with this center. You took a personal disappointment and transformed it into something that will benefit thousands of young people. You turned pain into purpose." As the afternoon continued, I was approached by Eleanor Whitman, David's mother. "Mrs. Parker," she said, studying the photo wall, "I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about you based on superficial things. This event, what you've built here, this is real sophistication. What my family considers important seems rather shallow by comparison." Before I could respond, I heard a familiar voice. "Mom?" I turned to see Melissa standing in the entrance hall, looking beautiful but uncertain. Behind her stood David, uncomfortable in his expensive suit. "Melissa, I didn't expect to see you here." "I wanted to see what you'd built." Her eyes swept the space. "Mom, this is incredible." I led Melissa and David through the center, introducing them to volunteers and former students. With each room we visited, I could see Melissa's expression changing. She met Dr. Sarah Kim, a pediatric surgeon who credited me with helping her pass math requirements for medical school. She spoke with Marcus Torres, a mechanical engineer who'd been ready to drop out before I helped him discover his love for mathematics. "Mom," Melissa said, as we stood in the college counseling office, "I had no idea. All these people, all these lives you've touched." When we reached the main ballroom, she stopped. "Mom, can we talk privately?" I led her to the terrace overlooking the valley. "Mom, I need to apologize. I was wrong. Not just about excluding you from the wedding, but about the reasons I gave. You're not embarrassing. You're extraordinary." Tears formed in her eyes. I got so caught up in trying to fit into David's world that I forgot where I came from. I forgot that my strength, my education, my values, they all came from you. "Sweetheart, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do. Standing here, seeing what you've built, I realize that I should be proud to be your daughter. I know it's too late to change the wedding invitations, but I want you there, Mom. I need you there." My heart clenched. This was what I'd wanted to hear for months. But something had changed in me. "Melissa, I appreciate you saying that, but I need to ask you something. Are you inviting me because you genuinely want me there, or because seeing this makes you realize it would look bad not to include me?" She flinched. "Mom, how can you ask that?" "Because I need to know that you're not just managing your image." Melissa was quiet, looking out over the valley. "I don't know if I can separate those things anymore," she said finally. "What you've accomplished is part of who you are, and who you are is someone I should never have been ashamed of." It wasn't the answer I'd hoped for, but it was honest. "Melissa," I said gently, "I love you no matter what, but I won't be attending your wedding." She stared at me in shock. "Mom, why?" "I just apologized." "Because some things can't be undone with an apology. You chose to prioritize the opinions of people who judge others by their bank accounts over the love of the woman who raised you." "So you're punishing me?" "No, honey. I'm protecting myself. I'm choosing not to put myself in a situation where I'll be grudgingly tolerated instead of genuinely welcomed." David appeared, clearly sensing the tension. "Is everything all right?" "David, tell her," Melissa said through tears. "Tell my mother that we want her at our wedding." David looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Parker, you would be welcome at our wedding." "Thank you, David, but being welcome and being wanted are different things." I looked at both of them. "I hope your wedding is beautiful and your marriage is happy, and I hope that someday, when you have children of your own, you'll understand why the way you've treated me matters so much." I started to walk away, then turned back. "Melissa, you'll always be my daughter. When you're ready to have a relationship based on love and respect rather than social climbing, call me. I'll be here." The launch event continued until well after sunset. By the time the last guest left, we had raised over $75,000 in additional funding and had a waiting list of people wanting to volunteer. Caroline Morrison found me as the cleaning crew finished. "Evelyn, I've planned hundreds of events, but I've never seen anything like this. The energy, the genuine enthusiasm. It was extraordinary. It was, wasn't it? When you talked about turning pain into purpose, that was powerful. I looked around the beautiful space. Caroline, when this started, it was about proving I wasn't the embarrassment my daughter thought I was. Now, it's about something much bigger. It's about creating opportunities for young people who need someone to believe in them. Monday brought a flood of calls and emails, reporters, potential donors, educators interested in our model. But the call that mattered most came from Jennifer Walsh. Mrs. Parker, I need to tell you something. What happened at your launch event made me realize I want to work for organizations that create real value, not just pretty pictures. Would you consider hiring me as the center's communications director? Jennifer, that's wonderful, but I'm not sure we can match what Morrison Events pays you. Mrs. Parker, I don't want to work for people who think your daughter's wedding is more important than what you're building. I want to work for someone who builds things that matter. By December, the Margaret Parker Center was operating at full capacity. Our tutoring program had a waiting list. Our college prep workshops were filled months in advance. 3 students had already raised their SAT scores by over 200 points. The state education department featured us in their annual report. 5 other communities had successfully launched their own centers. I was working late one evening when the front door chimed. Looking up, I saw Melissa silhouetted against the winter darkness. Hi, Mom. Hello, sweetheart. What brings you here? I've been driving by for weeks, watching the kids come and go. I finally got the courage to come in. She looked around the tutoring room. Mom, I need to tell you something. The wedding. It wasn't what I thought it would be. It was beautiful, expensive, impressive. But sitting there during the ceremony, looking out at all those people who barely knew us, I kept thinking about your event, about the way people looked at you with genuine respect. She sat down in one of the student chairs. I realized that what you built here, this community, these relationships, this purpose, this is what sophistication actually looks like. Melissa, what do you need from me? I need to understand how to find my way back to being the person you raised me to be. You can start by volunteering. We need people with business backgrounds to help our students understand career paths. You'd let me volunteer here? After everything? This center serves anyone who wants to learn and grow. That includes my daughter. Melissa started volunteering the following week, working with high school students on college applications and interview skills. At first, she was tentative, unsure of herself in this environment where accomplishment was measured differently than in David's social circle. But gradually, I watched her rediscover the confidence and values that had made me proud of her. Mom, she said one evening, as we were closing up, I forgot how good it feels to do work that actually matters. Her marriage to David was struggling. The differences in values that had led to my exclusion were creating ongoing tension. He doesn't understand why I spend so much time here, she told me. He thinks I should be focused on networking events that could advance his career. What do you think? I think I married someone who values the wrong things, and I think I became someone who valued the wrong things too. Over the following months, I watched Melissa transform. She started taking evening classes in nonprofit management. She developed new programs for the center that addressed gaps we hadn't recognized. Her marriage to David ended quietly in the fall. They'd simply grown in different directions. I'm sad about the divorce, she told me, but I'm not sad about discovering who I really want to be. 2 years after the launch, we held our second annual fundraising gala. The event had grown to become one of the most anticipated community gatherings of the year. But this time, I wasn't planning it alone. Melissa had become our official program director, bringing fresh ideas and boundless energy to everything we did. Standing in the same ballroom where I'd launched this journey, now addressing a crowd twice as large, I felt the satisfaction of a life's work well done. Friends, I began. 2 years ago, I stood in this room and talked about believing in potential. Tonight, I want to talk about the power of transformation. This center exists because a community believed that every young person deserves support. But what I've learned is that transformation goes both ways. Our students learn and grow, but so do our mentors. Tonight, I want to share the stage with someone who embodies that transformation. I gestured toward Melissa, who stepped forward to join me. My daughter, Melissa, has become not just our program director, but a true leader in educational equity. She's shown that expertise and passion, combined with genuine care for young people, can create remarkable results. Melissa stepped to the microphone, confident now in a way that was entirely different from the social confidence she'd displayed at her wedding. 2 years ago, I made choices that I'm not proud of. I prioritized the wrong things and hurt the person who'd given me everything. But this center gave me a chance to remember who I really wanted to be. Every day, I work with young people who are discovering their potential, and every day, they remind me that transformation is possible, that growth never stops, and that the most important question isn't where you've been, but where you're going. By the 3rd year, our impact had grown beyond anything I'd originally envisioned. The Margaret Parker Center wasn't just changing individual lives, it was changing communities. The model had attracted national attention. Education researchers were studying our approach. 5 other communities had successfully launched centers, with 3 more in development. But the moment that meant the most came on a Tuesday afternoon when Dr. Sarah Kim, one of my first students from 1983, stopped by unannounced. "Mrs. Parker, I couldn't leave town without seeing what you've built, and I brought something for you." She handed me an envelope with my name in careful script. "This is from my daughter Emma. She's a senior in high school now." I opened the letter with trembling hands. "Dear Mrs. Parker, you don't know me, but you changed my life before I was even born. My mother tells me that you're the reason she became a doctor. You helped her pass the math requirements when she was ready to give up. Because you believed in my mother, she was able to save my life when I was born with a serious heart defect. Because you believed in her, she's gone on to save hundreds of other children's lives. Now, seeing what you're building with the center, I'm inspired to follow in both your footsteps and my mother's. I want to become a teacher and a doctor, to help kids learn and to help heal them too. Thank you for showing us that believing in people creates ripple effects that last for generations." With gratitude, Emma Kim. Looking up at Sarah through tears, I was unable to speak. "Mrs. Parker, do you understand what you've done? You didn't just teach me math. You created a legacy that's still growing, still changing lives." The success of our model led to an opportunity I hadn't expected, developing a comprehensive training program for communities wanting to start their own centers. The National Education Foundation invited me to work with education leaders across the country. "Mom," Melissa said, when I told her about the opportunity, "this is incredible. You'll be able to help create dozens of these centers." "It would mean being away from here quite a bit. Are you comfortable managing things while I travel?" She smiled, the confident, purposeful smile of someone who'd found her calling. "I've been learning from the best for 3 years now. I think I'm ready." Over the next year, I traveled to 17 cities, training community leaders in the Margaret Parker Center model. By year's end, 23 communities had active centers. Thousands of students were receiving support. Hundreds of adults had rediscovered the joy of making a difference. Melissa had completed her master's degree in nonprofit management and been invited to speak at education conferences. She'd developed innovations that were being adopted by centers across the network. "You know what I realized?" she told me one evening. "I spent so much time trying to impress people who didn't matter that I almost missed the chance to do work that does matter." "You were always worth respecting, sweetheart. You just forgot it for a while." "How did you know that building this center would lead to all of this?" "I didn't know, Melissa. When I started this, I was angry and hurt, but the work itself taught me what really mattered. The young people taught me. The community taught me. You taught me." "What did I teach you?" "You taught me that people can change, that it's never too late to choose growth over comfort, and that sometimes the most painful experiences become the foundation for our greatest contributions." 5 years after its founding, the Margaret Parker Center received the National Community Impact Award, recognizing our model as one of the most effective community-based education programs in the country. The ceremony was in Washington, D.C., with representatives from all 31 centers now operating across the country. As I accepted the award, I looked out at an audience that included Melissa, now the executive director, and dozens of my former students who'd traveled to celebrate. When I accepted my first teaching position 48 years ago, I began, I thought I understood what education could accomplish. What I didn't understand then, but have learned through decades of working with remarkable young people, is that education is never just about the subject matter. It's about believing in potential. The Margaret Parker Center represents the best of what education can be: comprehensive, community-based, focused on the whole person. But more than that, it represents the power of transformation. This award doesn't belong to me. It belongs to every educator who's ever stayed late to help a struggling student, every volunteer who's ever shared their expertise, every young person who's ever had the courage to believe in their own potential. But mostly, it belongs to the future, to the young people we're preparing to lead, to the communities they'll strengthen, and to the lives they'll change. As I entered my 78th year, I began thinking seriously about legacy and succession. The network was thriving, but I wanted to ensure the mission would continue long after I was gone. Melissa and I spent months developing a comprehensive succession plan. She would become the national director, with regional coordinators managing clusters of centers. We created the Margaret Parker Foundation to provide ongoing support and established an endowment for long-term sustainability. We developed training programs to maintain quality across all locations. Most importantly, we documented our approach in a book, Building Bridges: How Community Education Centers Transform Lives and Communities. "Mom," Melissa said, as we worked on the final chapters, "I want to include something about your original motivation, about how personal pain can become a catalyst for positive change." "Are you sure? It's not particularly flattering." "That's exactly why it's important. People need to know that transformation is possible, that mistakes don't define us, that it's never too late to choose a better path." The book became a bestseller in education circles and led to speaking engagements nationwide. But the response that meant the most came from a teacher in rural Montana. "Dear Mrs. Parker, I read your book and realized our small community could create something like your center. Following your model, we've started our own. In 6 months, we've helped 30 students raise their grades and created a community of learners stronger than anything we've had before. Thank you for showing us that big changes can start with one person's decision to turn disappointment into determination. P.S. My grandmother always told me that the best revenge is a life well lived. You've proven her right." On a crisp October morning, exactly 10 years after the launch of the Margaret Parker Center, I stood in the original ballroom, surrounded by nearly 200 people celebrating a decade of impact. The statistics were impressive. Over 3,000 students served across 47 centers in 12 states, hundreds of college scholarships awarded, dozens of communities transformed. But the real measure wasn't in numbers, it was in the faces around me. There was Jasmine, now doctor, Jasmine Williams, a practicing engineer who'd become a major center supporter. Marcus, who'd used his improved test scores for a full scholarship and was now teaching mathematics. Sarah, pursuing education and pre-medicine just as she'd promised. There was Jennifer Walsh, who'd left corporate work to become our national communications director. Tom Bradley, whose construction company now specialized in center construction. Maria Santos, whose catering business focused on nonprofit events. And there was Melissa, confident and purposeful, addressing the crowd as the newly appointed CEO of the Margaret Parker Foundation. 10 years ago, she said, my mother faced a choice. She could let disappointment define her future, or use that pain as fuel for building something meaningful. She chose to build, and in building, she didn't just create this center, she created a movement. She didn't just serve students, she served communities. She didn't just transform lives, she transformed how we think about education and community responsibility. But perhaps, most importantly, she showed all of us that it's never too late to become the person you're meant to be, that setbacks can become setups, that personal healing and community service can happen simultaneously. Today, we celebrate not just what's been accomplished, but what's still possible. Every young person who discovers their potential, every volunteer who rediscovers their purpose, every community that chooses to invest in its future. As the celebration continued, I found myself thinking about the journey that brought me here. The pain of Melissa's rejection had been real and deep, but it had also been the catalyst for the most meaningful work of my life. I thought about all the young people who'd walked through our doors uncertain and left confident, the volunteers who'd rediscovered purpose, the communities that had grown stronger. Most of all, I thought about the lesson that had taken me 7 decades to understand. Our greatest disappointments can become our greatest opportunities, but only if we choose to transform pain into purpose, hurt into hope, setbacks into service. As I stood watching the celebration, I noticed something that made my heart swell with pride. Throughout the ballroom, former students who'd become successful professionals were now mentoring our current students. The cycle was continuing, expanding, creating new ripples of possibility. Dr. Angela Rodriguez approached me with a young woman I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Parker, I'd like you to meet someone special. This is Maria Gonzalez. She was one of our first students 5 years ago." Maria stepped forward confidently, nothing like the shy teenager I remembered from our early days. "Mrs. Parker, I wanted to thank you personally. When I started coming here, I was failing algebra, and my family was pressuring me to drop out of school to work. The mentors here didn't just help me pass math, they helped me believe I could succeed in college." "Where are you now, Maria?" Her smile lit up the room. "I just graduated from State University with a degree in engineering, but more than that, I'm starting as a volunteer mentor here next week. I want to be for other kids what this place was for me." This was it. This was the moment I knew we truly succeeded, not just in creating programs or raising test scores, but in creating a sustainable cycle of empowerment that would outlast any single person or generation. Later that evening, as guests began to leave, Melissa found me on the terrace where we'd had our difficult conversation years earlier. "Mom, there's something I need to say." I waited, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the valley below us in golden light. "I've been thinking about that day when I told you that you didn't fit in with David's world, that you were too embarrassing for my wedding." "Melissa, we don't need to." "Yes, we do. Because I want you to know that standing here tonight, seeing all of this, understanding the lives you've changed and the movement you've started, I realize that I had it completely backward." She turned to face me fully. "It wasn't that you didn't fit into their world. It's that their world wasn't worthy of you, and instead of being embarrassed by my mother, I should have been embarrassed by my own values. You were trying to find your place in the world. That's what young people do." "Maybe, but I lost sight of something important. The woman who raised me wasn't someone to be hidden or explained away. She was someone to be celebrated, someone to learn from, someone to aspire to become." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the lights begin to twinkle in the valley below. "You know what the best part is?" Melissa continued. "Tonight, when people asked me about the center, about our programs, about our impact, I got to say my mother built this. Not with embarrassment or qualification, but with pure pride." 6 months later, I received an invitation that made me smile with a satisfaction deeper than any revenge could provide. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive, with elegant calligraphy addressing it to Mrs. Evelyn Parker and guest. Inside was an invitation to the Whitman Family Foundation annual gala, with a handwritten note from Eleanor Whitman. "Dear Mrs. Parker, we would be honored by your presence at our annual fundraising event. This year, we're dedicating the evening to supporting educational initiatives in our community. We hope you'll consider being our keynote speaker, sharing your expertise on community-based education programs. Your work has inspired us to reconsider our philanthropic priorities and focus on initiatives that create lasting change. With sincere respect, Eleanor Whitman." I called Caroline Morrison to ask her opinion. "Evelyn, this is extraordinary. The Whitmans have never focused on education before. Their foundation typically supports arts organizations and social clubs. This represents a complete shift in their priorities." "What do you think prompted it?" "You did. Your success, your impact, your model of what meaningful philanthropy looks like. They're trying to align themselves with work that actually matters." I thought about it for several days. Part of me was tempted to decline, a small, vindictive part that remembered the pain of being deemed unworthy of my own daughter's wedding. But the larger part of me, the part that had learned to transform pain into purpose, recognized this for what it was, an opportunity to expand our impact even further. I accepted the invitation and prepared a speech about the power of community investment in education. The gala was everything I expected: elegant, expensive, attended by the same social elite who had once dismissed me. But now I stood at the podium as the featured speaker, sharing our model with an audience that hung on every word. Ladies and gentlemen, I concluded, true sophistication isn't measured by the cost of your event or the exclusivity of your guest list. It's measured by the lasting impact you have on your community and the lives you change for the better. The standing ovation lasted for several minutes, but the real victory came afterward when 3 different couples approached me about funding new Margaret Parker Centers in their communities. Word of our success had reached the highest levels of education policy. I was invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee on education about community-based learning models. Standing in that hearing room in Washington, addressing senators and representatives, I thought about the journey that had brought me there. From a woman deemed too embarrassing for her daughter's wedding to someone whose expertise was being sought by national lawmakers. Honorable members of the committee, I began, education is not just about test scores or graduation rates, though those matter. It's about creating communities where every young person has access to the support, encouragement, and opportunities they need to reach their full potential. I shared our data. 89% of our students showed measurable improvement in academic performance within 1 semester. 94% of our high school seniors went on to post-secondary education. But more importantly, 100% reported increased confidence and a stronger sense of their own capabilities. The Margaret Parker Center model works because it recognizes that learning doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in community with mentors who believe in students' potential and provide both academic support and life guidance. The questions from committee members were thoughtful and engaged. Several asked about the feasibility of implementing similar programs in their own districts. Following the hearing, I was approached by the Department of Education about developing a national pilot program based on our model. Mrs. Parker, said Deputy Secretary Williams, what you've created represents exactly the kind of innovative, community-based approach we need to scale across the country. Would you be willing to serve as a senior advisor on a national initiative? It was overwhelming and humbling. The work I'd started in response to personal pain had grown into something that could potentially impact education policy nationwide. 2 years later, I stood in the Rose Garden of the White House, receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom for my contributions to education and community development. As the president placed the medal around my neck, I thought about all the people who had made this moment possible, the students who had trusted me with their dreams, the volunteers who had shared their expertise, the communities that had embraced our model, and especially Melissa, who had found her way back to the values that truly mattered. Mrs. Parker, the president said during the ceremony, represents the best of American innovation and community spirit. She took a model that worked in one community and helped it spread across the nation, touching thousands of lives and proving that education at its best is a community endeavor. In the audience, I could see Melissa beaming with pride. Next to her sat several of my former students, now accomplished professionals who had traveled from across the country to witness this moment. But the face that meant the most to me was that of Maria Gonzalez, the young woman who had gone from struggling student to successful engineer to dedicated mentor. She represented everything the Margaret Parker Center stood for: the transformation of potential into achievement, the cycle of giving back, the power of believing in yourself and others. After the ceremony, Melissa hugged me tightly. "Mom, do you remember what you said to me that day on the terrace, about how I'd understand someday when I had children of my own?" "I remember. Well, I may not have children yet, but I understand now. I understand that the way we treat the people who love us most says everything about who we really are, and I understand that real success isn't about impressing strangers. It's about honoring the people who shaped us and using our blessings to lift up others." Now, in my 80th year, I spend most of my time in an advisory role, watching Melissa lead the Margaret Parker Foundation with a vision and energy that surpasses even my own original dreams. Under her leadership, the network has grown to include over 70 centers across 15 states. The model has been adapted for rural communities, urban neighborhoods, and everything in between. Each center maintains the core principles while adapting to local needs and resources. But perhaps the most meaningful development has been the emergence of the second generation, students who were helped by our centers and have now returned as professional staff and volunteer mentors. Maria Gonzalez now serves as the regional coordinator for the Southwest. Marcus Torres, the young man who nearly dropped out before finding his love for mathematics, has become our director of STEM programming. Dr. Jasmine Williams leads our college preparation initiatives. Watching them train new volunteers and mentor current students, I see the true measure of our success. We didn't just help individual students achieve their goals. We created leaders who are now helping others achieve theirs. Last month, I received a letter that brought tears to my eyes. Dear Mrs. Parker, you probably don't remember me, but I was one of the students in your very first tutoring group 10 years ago. I was failing everything and convinced I was too stupid for school. Today, I graduated from medical school. I start my residency in pediatrics next month, and my goal is to work in underserved communities, helping kids who feel the way I once felt. I wanted you to know that the confidence you helped me find didn't just change my life, it's going to help me change other lives too. Thank you for seeing potential where others saw problems. Dr. James Washington. This is our legacy, not just test scores or college acceptances, but young people who have learned to believe in themselves and are now helping others do the same. People often ask me what I've learned from this journey, what wisdom I can share with others facing their own disappointments and setbacks. The truth is, I've learned that life rarely unfolds according to our plans, but it often unfolds according to our choices. When Melissa excluded me from her wedding, I had several choices. I could have withdrawn into hurt and bitterness. I could have accepted her assessment of my worth. I could have spent my remaining years feeling sorry for myself. Instead, I chose to channel my pain into purpose. I chose to prove my worth, not to change her mind about me, but to remind myself of who I really was. That choice, to build rather than withdraw, to serve rather than sulk, to transform rather than transfer my pain, made all the difference. I've learned that age is not a limitation, but a liberation. At 68, I was finally free from the need to please everyone, free to focus on what truly mattered, free to take risks in service of something larger than myself. I've learned that community is everything. No individual accomplishment can compare to the satisfaction of building something that serves others and continues to grow long after you're gone. Most importantly, I've learned that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, and reconciliation doesn't require pretending that hurtful actions never happened. Melissa and I have rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and shared values, not by ignoring the past, but by choosing to create a better future. As I write this, the Margaret Parker Centers are thriving in ways I never imagined. We've expanded beyond tutoring and college prep to include job training programs, financial literacy education, and even small business incubation for young entrepreneurs. The model has attracted international attention. Delegations from Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia have visited to learn about our approach. 3 pilot programs based on our model are now operating in other countries, but the work that gives me the most joy happens right here in our original center, where I still volunteer 2 afternoons a week, working with students who remind me why I became a teacher in the first place. Yesterday, a 15-year-old named Amanda told me she'd never been good at math. By the end of our session, she'd solved 3 algebraic equations and was asking if she could come back tomorrow. Mrs. Parker, she said as she was leaving, how did you know I could do this when I didn't even know it myself? Because, I told her, believing in potential is my specialty. This is why the work continues. This is why the network keeps growing. This is why former students become mentors and struggling teenagers become confident young adults. Every day, in centers across the country, someone is discovering what they're capable of achieving. Every day, a volunteer is rediscovering the joy of making a difference. Every day, A community is becoming stronger by investing in its young people. And every day I'm reminded that the best response to being underestimated is not anger or resentment, but excellence in service of others. Today marks the 15th anniversary of the Margaret Parker Center, and as I prepare for this final chapter, I'm overwhelmed by gratitude for the unexpected journey that brought me here. Melissa now leads a network of 93 centers, serving over 15,000 students annually. The Margaret Parker Foundation has provided over $50 million in scholarships and program funding. Thousands of volunteers have discovered the joy of mentoring young people. But numbers don't tell the real story. The real story is in the lives changed, the potential unlocked, the community strengthened by believing in their young people. The real story is in Maria Gonzalez, who went from struggling student to successful engineer to passionate advocate for educational equity. It's in Dr. James Washington, who went from failing student to pediatric resident dedicated to serving underserved communities. It's in Amanda, who discovered she could master algebra and is now considering a career in engineering. It's in my daughter Melissa, who lost her way for a while, but found her purpose in serving others and building something that will outlast us all. And it's in the thousands of other young people who have learned the most important lesson of all, that their potential is unlimited, their dreams are valid, and their communities believe in them. As I conclude this story, I want to speak directly to anyone who's reading this because they've been dismissed, excluded, or told they don't matter. Your worth is not determined by other people's opinions. Your potential is not limited by other people's vision. Your future is not constrained by other people's expectations. You have something valuable to offer the world. You have experiences that can help others. You have the power to transform disappointment into determination, setbacks into comebacks, pain into purpose. Start where you are. Use what you have. Do what you can. Build something that matters. The Margaret Parker Centers exist because I refuse to let my daughter's rejection define my worth. They thrive because thousands of other people chose to believe in possibility over prejudice, community over competition, service over status. Whatever brought you to this story, whatever rejection you're facing, whatever dream you've been told to abandon, whatever disappointment is threatening to define your future, remember that endings can become beginnings. The most powerful revenge isn't getting back at those who hurt you. It's building a life so meaningful, so impactful, so full of purpose that their opinion becomes irrelevant. Prove them wrong by proving yourself right. And remember, you're never too old, never too ordinary, never too anything to make a difference. The world needs what you have to offer. If this story inspired you to believe in your own potential or reminded you of the power of community and education, please like this post and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Together, we can build a world where every person's worth is recognized and every dream is supported. Subscribe for more stories about transformation, resilience, and the power of never giving up on yourself.